So this will be a lesson to me to shave off this grey beard. I want to make a video about my experiences of buying bicycles. About 10 years ago I was hill climbing, and we did a 26-mile walk up to the top of Ben McDewey and back via a circuitous route. And at the end of this this trek, I was getting shin splints and bruised feet, blisters, and the girl I was with said, "Why don't we get bicycles and we can cycle in and just walk up the hill instead of doing the extra 12 miles which gets you into the hill and out." So I started buying bikes, and I did what a lot of people might do when they've got a little bit of spare cash. I ended up buying a lot of bikes. I bought a cheap Halfords bike to begin with, which was a steel bike, £500. To be honest, it was fine. I didn't need another mountain bike after that. And I bought myself a really good road bike, a Trek Doman 2012. Rim brakes, 2x10, and I tarted it up. I put on zip 202 in the front and a 404 on the back. Put on a Giro Ace 53T or 54T big ring. And again, I never needed another bike, and that is still my favourite bike. After buying lots of bikes, that bike is still my favourite. It has never ever gone wrong. It has tubular tyres, carbon rim brakes with carbon pads, except for the most extreme wet conditions when I don't cycle anyway. You don't need anything else except that bike. But being me and having some money, I went crazy and bought a bunch of bikes. What did I buy? I bought a Cannondale Scalpel Carbon X0 for £6,000. I bought a Cannondale Trigger black ink for £6,000-7,000. I bought a Santa Cruz 5010 Solo, £3,000-4,000. And before I bought any of those, I bought a Yeti SP6 Carbon. And I'm going to have to tail off here because I think I'm about to take a delivery from a delivery driver. Now, the Yeti was a very expensive bike. It was about £7,000 at the time. It's worth about £1,000 now. That's something else, worth talking about with bikes, is that bikes are always heavily discounted by bike shops. So you can knock off 20% the price you paid on your bike unless you bought it cheap. You've got a VAT at 20%, so that's something else that comes off. So 40% off the list price of a bike before you start. And then of course bike manufacturers are so clever at making everything obsolete. 2x10, 1x11, 2x11, 1x13, sorry, 1x12, 1x13. Electronic shifting, wireless shifting, hydraulic brakes. Every year the bike that you bought becomes more and more obsolete, and people, especially newbies, will just buy the latest and greatest thing they've read about on Bike Radar or YouTube or GCN or whatever, even though it'll make no difference whatsoever to the cycling performance. The only thing that really counts in cycling performance is your heart, lungs, and the strength of your legs, and of course your weight. And I'm very heavy, I'm 100 kilograms. Anyway, the Yeti was my first lesson in why you probably shouldn't buy bikes, particularly exotic bikes, and particularly bikes that have fancy components on them. This Yeti had a race face spider, and that's the bit that connects the chain ring to the cranks. It's the bit the chain goes around, if you like. And it was carbon, and it was cool, and it made the bike was already very light. And I was going up at just a very moderate single track, about 5-6 miles an hour, and I was going over a bump, just a little muddy bump, and I was thrown over the front of the handlebars, and I could not understand what had happened. Well, what had happened is that this carbon spider, had shattered, had just failed. And that caused the cranks to come off the bike and for the chain to collapse and for me to go over the handlebars because I hit the brakes in panic. I hadn't learned by that point that you should never hit the brakes in panic, particularly the front brake. And this race face spider was a sort of £400 or £500 component. It was an expensive component. It completely failed and was dangerous. I contacted Raceface. They said, "Oh, we've been bought over. We're a new company now. We don't make that component anymore." And they said, "But we'll give you £100 to help towards buying another one." Great. I could have broken my neck. Anyhow, I replaced all of the crap on that bike with Shimano Saint, which is downhill bulletproof components. So it's now got a Shimano Saint chainring and crank set, and I made that bike 1x10 because I was having lots of problems with the lightweight gear shifting stuff as well. Anyway, it's a great bike now, but its value is nil because it's a 1x10, and it only weighs about 9 kilograms. An extraordinary bike, tremendous. Full suspension Yeti SB6C. Anyway, to race forward, I bought a Cannondale cyclocross bike because I thought it would be good for cross country, and I decided to build a Santa Cruz Stigmata from scratch. So I bought a Santa Cruz Stigmata frame, and I bought the components separately for that bike, and my goodness me, have I had problems with that bike. I don't think it was down to my build. I've replaced the SRAM Force right hand gear shifting hydraulic brake lever twice and rebuilt it twice. In the next video I'll show you all the bits that have been thrown away from that bike. Everything that could go wrong with that bike has just about gone wrong with that bike, and it's all been down to the SRAM Force components, which have just been beyond awful in their quality and their propensity to break. Gear levers jumping out of spools. I've replaced the spool 3 times. The hydraulic piston breaking, the bladder leaking and breaking twice. These are all manufacturing problems. And the other problem I've had recently is something I just had not envisaged would ever happen. And that is that the carbon rim, a Reynolds carbon rim on the scalpel, has actually warped. And I think this is because that bike, the rims are only 300 grams and it's only got 24 spokes. And I think that bike should have a weight limit of about 80 kilos, and of course I'm 100 kilos. And I think I've only used the bike 3-4 times on sort of walking tracks, you know, a railway line that's been resurfaced, just a very, like a road but with gravel, a gravel road. And spokes had worked loose on this bike, and the actual rim itself had warped. And I'm amazed that this can happen, but when I looked into it online, lots of people have had problems with Reynolds carbon rims. They just don't seem to be well made. And a lot of them have got spoke problems with loose spokes and broken spokes. The weird thing about this Reynolds warped rim is there's no sign of any damage. It's just slightly bent. So in the next video I will take you through the repairs that I've made to these bikes and the bits that have been thrown away, and the cost of buying lots of bikes, because if you don't use bikes, if you've got a lot of bikes in your quiver, and I've got 7, I had 9, they'll just go wrong by sitting there. One example was the SRAM again. The scalpel had high-end SRAM brakes, and it had been sitting there for about a year, and when I took it out, the brakes had seized. The fluid had got into the pistons or whatever and just seized the brakes completely. And I replaced the entire brake system with Shimano XT, and in 5 years nothing's ever gone wrong again. Shimano never goes wrong, SRAM always seems to go wrong. The trigger has Magura carbon lever brakes, and they've been great. Of course, the other thing about SRAM is SRAM buy companies, and SRAM has built up a conglomerate from companies it's bought, like Avid and Magura and others, and they're not really SRAM components. I think SRAM owns Zip now as well, whereas Shimano, I think they've got a greater control over their products and their components, and also SRAM is very much leading edge. SRAM will bring things out for commercial reasons that really haven't been field tested at all, and we, the consumer, are the testers, and they just recall things and replace things as they break, which is not good. Whereas Shimano tend to wait 1 to 2 years until everything's fine, and then they release it and it just doesn't go wrong. I'm sure people have exceptional stories that will contradict this. Anyway, that's a very, very long video. I'll need to chop it up, and then next time I will show you the actual bits and pieces that have gone wrong, and the debris, the carnage of all these SRAM components.